What's up, folks? I hope you can hear me and see me. Welcome back to another show. We got so much to talk about today because what a weekend it was. For me on a personal level, fantastic. I loved every moment of my commentary duties for the BBC. But what a great race it was. In fact, what a great race weekend it was. 70th anniversary of Formula One, and it had a little bit of everything. We had a great race, which of course is what it's all about. But even before all that, we've got controversy on and off track. We've got team principals openly fighting and arguing with each other. We've got protests, counter protests, appeals, the whole shebang, which felt like a fitting way to celebrate 70 years of Formula One because it kind of summed it all up in one weekend, didn't it? But either way, I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. I hope you did too. And what a great result. That's exactly what we were all hoping for. I don't think many people thought it would happen, but it's what we all wanted, didn't it? I mean, come on. Who on earth would have predicted that Max Verstappen would have won the 70th anniversary Grand Prix? About an hour and a half before the race starts, which I'm really looking forward to. I think it's going to be a great race. Palmer, predictions for today?
Be a good race. Hamilton's going to charge behind Bottas. I think he might sneak it.
I'm going to go Verstappen for the win.
Oh, blimey.
And it's Max Verstappen, the unlikely winner of Formula One's 70th anniversary Grand Prix in the Red Bull. What a drive, what a race. Lewis Hamilton brings it in second in the Mercedes, with his teammate Valtteri Bottas in the sister Mercedes coming home third. Well, Jolien, that is not the result that we thought we were going to get, but what a race.
What a race it was. Great race. Who saw that coming? I certainly didn't. From fourth on the grid, Max Verstappen wins the Grand Prix. Marc Priestley, you saw that coming. You made that prediction pre-Grand Prix, but I think even you must be surprised with that one.
Yeah, this guy saw it coming. Yeah, I didn't really believe it even when I said it, but I'm so pleased that that was the way it worked out. Because it's what the championship needed, didn't it? I mean, I'm not suddenly saying that Mercedes are in trouble and Max is going to suddenly win the championship. But for a weekend of racing, that is exactly what we were after. Something a little bit different to the norm, and we got it. Thank you all for joining. I've seen loads of people flying through the comments from all over the world, again, as normal, so thank you. Somebody from Lincoln, Renty, hello there. I've seen people from Nigeria, Canada again. Loads of people in America, as always, Brazil, fantastic. Thank you so much all for joining. I appreciate it every week. Really pleased to see so many people. I think something like there were nearly 70 odd people about half an hour ago, all engaging in chat amongst yourselves. It's just brilliant. I think it's just a brilliant thing that we've created together, and it is together because it's you guys that make it. So well done to you all, and thank you. Yeah, people from Australia, Queensland, Australia. Steve, hello mate, thank you for joining. Who else have we got here? Dallas, Texas. Claudio, thank you. Nigeria, Toronto, Boston. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Leicester in the UK as well. It is hot here in the UK, by the way. It is sweltering, especially with the two lights that I've got pointing at me. But there we go. Anyway, let's get on with it. Let's talk Formula One. It was really all about... it was all about the race on Sunday, but that all started, of course, the way that the race played out started on Saturday, didn't it? It started in qualifying, and the way that Max Verstappen and his team chose to go with a different strategy to everybody else, qualifying on that hard tyre. Really, really bold move, a brave move. You could see how bold it was because literally no one else did it in that top 10. It was a risk, and there was a chance that he may not have got through. I don't think even they knew how dominant that particular tyre would be on Sunday, but didn't it pay off? We'll get into all of that in a moment. Let's start with some of the questions that you guys have fired in throughout the day and across the weekend. We're going to start with this one. Hold on, there we go. This one here from Neil Roberts, who says, has Max's win yesterday effectively ended Bottas's title hopes, as Marc will be more likely to use him to protect Hamilton from Verstappen? And I think there's a few interesting talking points within that. So to answer the question specifically, has Max's win ended Bottas's championship hopes? I don't think it was about Max's win that if we're going to say Bottas's championship's over, and I think that's a bit premature, let's be honest. But I think Valtteri Bottas did himself no favours, unfortunately, this weekend. He was a bit Damned if he did, damned if he didn't. He did everything right on Saturday, of course, stuck it on pole. The problem he's got is that he's got his teammate is Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis, when he's chasing somebody, is just almost unbeatable. He's aggressive, more aggressive than Valtteri is, and that's one of the things that Valtteri needs to step up. If you think about how Nico Rosberg managed to destabilise Lewis Hamilton, it was about being aggressive, getting elbows out, doing things that Lewis wouldn't expect you to do. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because if Lewis Hamilton or any driver is coming up behind Valtteri Bottas and you have to get past for the race win, I don't think Lewis sees Valtteri as any major threat. I don't see he sees him as anything dangerous or troublesome on track. If Lewis was coming up behind Max Verstappen, I think it's a different story. He's going to be wary of Max. He's going to wonder what Max is going to do, where he's going to put his car, how aggressively is he going to defend that position. That's what Valtteri Bottas, I think, needed to do this weekend. And it was all about this weekend. He had an opportunity from starting on pole to be that aggressive. He didn't do it. Obviously, he was hampered by a car that was massively struggling on those tyres. But I just think the way that Bottas, I just think Bottas as a driver ultimately isn't as good as Lewis Hamilton, and that's probably the problem, isn't it, at the end of the day? I'd love to know what you think. Max, are they going to favour Lewis over Valtteri within the Mercedes team? I don't think they need to. I don't think they need to start putting any team orders in place. I don't think Max is necessarily going to be a threat at every Grand Prix like he was this weekend. And I do think that Lewis is quick enough anyway that when they let them race, more often than not, Lewis will come out on top. And Lewis already has a substantial championship lead already. And I think that's going to potentially just continue. So let's see what you're saying on this. But Bottas, has he just put the nail in his own coffin this weekend in terms of his championship? Let's see what you're saying. Bottas is great when he's being chased. He has great drives under pressure, says Varun Sambi. Well, he can be great, but he certainly wasn't great enough. And he hasn't been great enough, has he? Because Lewis, I know Lewis was on a slightly different car, with a slightly different car at that time of the race, but I don't think any of us doubted that Lewis was going to get past Valtteri Bottas. If it was the other way round, I don't think it would have been as clear cut. I think if the two cars had switched, you know, Valtteri on fresher tyres than Lewis, I'm still not sure that we would have said Valtteri would have got past. And I think that's perhaps the problem. It's the perception of Valtteri compared to the perception of a Lewis or a Max or a Daniel Ricciardo. Perhaps this is one of his problems. Let me see. How close would it be if Max didn't DNF though? Well, I think the thing, if you're talking about the championship, yeah, Max has had a DNF, but let's not forget Valtteri also had effectively a DNF, didn't he, in the British Grand Prix when his tyre failed and it dropped him outside the points. Before that, he was on for a huge haul of points. So I think actually Max Verstappen and Valtteri Bottas, in terms of their championship, are pretty much level in terms of the terrible luck they've had in that sense. And actually, look who's ahead. It's Max Verstappen who's now ahead. They've both won one race each, but one of those two drivers has a vastly better car than the other. And yet, look who's ahead. It's Max Verstappen. I don't want to beat up on Valtteri Bottas too much because I do have a lot of respect for him. I think he's a great driver, but is he great enough to overcome a teammate of Lewis Hamilton? Personally, I'm not sure. Haven't seen enough yet. Valtteri's what Red Bull need Alex Albon to be, says Joe Perkins. Valtteri's what they need Alex Albon to be at Red Bull. Possibly a stronger number two, or certainly a guy who's comfortable. Don't forget that's much easier to do in a Mercedes, which is, let's take this weekend aside, an absolutely dominant car. So when you've got a car that's a second quicker than anything else on the grid under normal circumstances, your number two driver is much better placed to be able to back up the number one driver because he's got no competition from behind. So slight differences in that sense. But yeah, I kind of agree. That is what they need Alex Albon to do, to step up and be a wingman for Max Verstappen, which at the moment he's not able to do because he's qualifying so far back on a Saturday. Valtteri's a typical number two, won't come close to Lewis, says Paul. Lando in the Mercedes, that would be fun. He would take it to Lewis, says Patrick. It would be fun, wouldn't it? Lando in a Merc up against Lewis. But also George Russell, which is perhaps the more likely scenario, up against Lewis. Wouldn't that be great in a couple of years' time? Valtteri, of course, just signed a one-year extension to his contract. So he's secure for next year, but after that, not so much. And it's a whole new car, it's a whole new set of regulations, perhaps the perfect time to bring in a George Russell. Lewis, we think, is about to sign a 3-year deal at Merc. That would mean that he's got 1 more year with Valtteri, potentially then a couple of years with George Russell as a teammate, maybe, who can learn the ropes and perhaps even take over the mantle of lead Mercedes driver when Lewis finally does retire at some point. Just theories, but that's how it's sort of shaping up in the background, isn't it? Let me see. Hi Mark, love the show. Do you think the driver merry-go-round will be triggered before the end of the season, says Bob Brown? It's already been triggered, hasn't it? I mean, the driver I think what you must be referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you must be saying is the whole movement of Daniel Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz to Ferrari. I guess if you're saying that, will that be triggered early? I can't see it. And a few people have asked that, to be fair. I can't see it. I can't see why there's a good argument to say Ferrari would want Sainz in their car. We'll get onto that more in a moment. But I can't see why Renault would let Daniel go either. Daniel Ricciardo right now is hands down the best thing about Renault. And they're not going to let him go before the season's out. So I can't see it happening. Can't see that being triggered. But yeah, in terms of a driver merry-go-round, it's been a good year for that, hasn't it? Lots going on. Let me see. Do you think that the DAS system had an impact on the rapid wear rate of the Mercs, says Gilet123? I don't think that, no. Let's get on to that Merc chat then, because we've got to talk tyres. I don't think it had anything to do with DAS for 2 reasons. First of all, I'd actually be surprised if they used it in the race this week. We didn't get a safety car. Perhaps they would have used it. In fact, I don't even think they would have used it at all. The DAS is really useful for warming up tyres or stopping tyre temperature from dropping under things like safety cars, or on your warm-up lap to a qualifying run, on the lap to the grid for the, so the formation lap, for example. But this weekend, it was all about keeping tyre temperature down. And for that reason, I don't think that they would have used DAS. Potentially, you could set DAS up in a way that actually reduces tow in certain circumstances and minimises tyre temperature. But if they'd done that, it wouldn't really affect the wear rate of the tyres. It would actually have a lesser impact. So I don't think it had anything to do with DAS. Equally, they were struggling just as much at the rear of the car as they were at the front anyway. So what was the problem with Mercedes? Well, my take on this is that it's largely to do with tyre pressures. So of course, for this second race, we had massively inflated tyre pressures from Pirelli, minimum pressures mandated by Pirelli in response to the failures that we had a week ago at the British Grand Prix. 27 PSI on the front, that's nearly what you put in your road car. I mean, that's huge. I guess what you're looking for in an ideal world, if the teams were free to run whatever tyre pressures they want on the front end of the car, you'd be looking more at something like 18, 19 PSI, maybe even less on a day like Sunday. So to go from the ideal of that up to 27 is an enormous leap, and so far away from ideal. Yes, they were quite high the week before. They were 25 on the front end the week before, but 27 is, well, it might even be unprecedented. I can't remember a Formula 1 team ever running tyre pressures like that. So that's the first thing. The Mercedes clearly didn't deal with that very well, but it's also just not a good car at running in very hot temperatures. It struggles to deal with tyre wear in those temperatures. It certainly struggles when the temperatures are high and the compounds are soft, which is the other thing that we had this weekend. And I think the 3 of those things combined just meant they just had no handle on the car. It feels like the Red Bull, the sort of chassis dynamics of the Red Bull, the way it rolls in corners, the way it throws weight forward under braking and under acceleration, the way it shifts the balance around the car, which is what the key thing in Formula 1 chassis technology is all about, and your suspension setup is about how you control those movements, things like roll and pitch and dive. They are crucial to things like tyre management, and it feels like the Red Bull is much more forgiving in that sense. Perhaps the Mercedes, with really high downforce that it has, it's obviously a very fast car, really downforce efficient car. Perhaps with the tyres inflated and the smaller contact patch that gives you, just meant that with the extra downforce it just wasn't able to cope with it, and it maybe needs a bigger contact patch, more movement in the side walls of the tyre to allow the car to move around. Perhaps they didn't adjust the suspension well enough to suit the harder or firmer tyres. I'm speculating massively, but those would be the things that would jump into my mind. Let's see what you're saying. Let's see. Does the tyre pressure change by temperature during the race? Yes, it does. So as temperature goes up, pressure goes up as well. The minimum tyre pressure that Pirelli mandate is a minimum starting pressure. So they can all be checked. In fact, they are all checked on the grid by FIA scrutineers. So everybody has their tyre pressures measured on the grid. They can also have them measured when they come in from after a pit stop or at the end of the race. In fact, they can have them measured at any point over the weekend. But that minimum starting pressure is a starting pressure. So they have to start the race above 27 psi in the front. It'll rise up as the temperature builds during the race. That's almost irrelevant in terms of legality. It's the cold, or the starting pressure rather, that's the one that's checked and measured to become legal or not. Merc added more downforce at pit. Merc added more downforce at pit. Do you mean, if you mean the pit stop? That's entirely possible on the front end, front wing change. That's perfectly normal again as the balance of the car shifts between tyre runs. So if you're going from a medium tyre to a hard tyre, it's entirely possible that the driver may have reported some understeer perhaps towards the end of his medium tyre run, and in that sense he may request half a turn more of front wing, for example, or it might have gone the other way. Maybe they took front wing off at the pit stop if indeed they made an adjustment. So if that's what you're saying, that's not unusual. It can go up or down, downforce on or off, and it's just a minute balance adjust between old tyres and new tyres, and depending on what the driver says his reports are from the cockpit. Let's see. Verstappen could have one stopped, says Dylan Wheater. Verstappen could have one stopped, but in the end he didn't have to. You know, that was the beauty of their strategy. They were able to go so long, and their car was looking after tyres so well that even when he switched to the medium tyre, just beyond, I think it was just beyond the halfway point in the race, he was always reporting that his tyres felt fine, there was no major problem, no major degradation. So that car was, even surprised them how good it was with that setup on those tyres. But yeah, he could well have probably edged that second stint out, managing his pace to get to the end. But the fact that the Mercedes were so slow, not just they were on a sort of wrong strategy as it turned out, but they were actually slow and suffering with tyres so badly that he had a pit stop in the bag and was clearly able to do a two-stop. So they were so quick in comparison, or in fact, rather, the Mercedes were so slow and struggling so much that yes, Verstappen was left with options in the second half of that race. Loved your BBC commentary. Thank you very much, Ben Kirby. I appreciate it. I loved it too. That was a dream job for me. First time I've actually led commentary for the BBC. I've done loads of co-coms. I've led commentary on Formula E for years. I've done co-coms on Formula 1, but never actually led it. So it was a new experience, but one that I thoroughly enjoyed. As I said earlier, to be commentating on such a special event and a pretty decent race was also brilliant. Right, let's pick up another question. We have got this one from, let me see. Oops, hold on. Oh God, I've messed that up. Hold on. Here we go. Lothar Globestar says, my question this week is Seb. What? Yeah, understandable question. Let's talk about Sebastian Vettel. A man who is struggling massively, isn't he, right now? Here he is. And I think what was really during the Grand Prix, and that stint that he did at the start of the race, the fact that he spun again on his own, essentially on his own, that's another mistake, unprompted really, from Sebastian Vettel. He's made far too many of those. But I think what was really telling was later on in the race, his criticism, open criticism of the team on the radio. I'm sure you all heard it, talking about how they messed up the strategy, which they did. Let's be fair, they did call it wrong. They put him into, they released him into traffic. They did a really short stint, a short stint on the hard tyre, much longer stint on the medium tyre, and the pit stop put him into all sorts of traffic where his race was just destroyed. But the reality was his race was destroyed when he spun at the start. So both of these two, both Sebastian and the team, are at war with each other in public, which is, I mean, that's never going to end well. So yeah, it's a disastrous situation with Sebastian. What's going on with him? I think there's two things. I think, you know, I know, and I think we all know, from talking to people in the paddock, that Sebastian is really hurt by what happened to him at Ferrari. Ferrari's a team that he loves and loved for a long time, a team that he honestly, more than anything, wanted to win the World Championship with and was so 100% committed to that. When they dropped him like a stone, which is what they've done, and they did it in a pretty unambiguous way. They just called him up and told him, after saying that he was their priority, called him up to say, we don't want you anymore. And it was almost as simple as that. And that hurts. Seb's a proud man. He's a 4-time world champion. He feels like he deserves more respect. I think he probably does. You can argue all day long about whether it's the right decision for Ferrari. I think that the truth is, particularly what Seb's gone on to do on the track since then, but also before then, I agree with Ferrari's decision. I would take somebody like, I'd have probably taken Daniel Ricciardo, actually, if I'd had total free reign on it. But they've taken Carlos Sainz, equally a good choice. I can understand it. And I can understand it over Sebastian. So there we go. I asked you all, I'll pick up your comments in a moment, but I asked a lot of you on the community tab to let me know the answer to this question earlier on. Will Sebastian Vettel finish the 2020 season with Ferrari? 46% of you say yes, 31 say no, 24 not sure. So split. I think I probably thought more of you would say no, he won't finish the season. I think I agree with the 31%, with the 48%. I think he will finish the season with Ferrari. I think he's too proud to walk away, and I don't think Ferrari will want the terrible negativity around ditching a 4-time world champion before his contract's even up. And I appreciate there's a lot of negativity right now with what's going on, but that's something they need to address, and they need to address it behind closed doors, away from the public, right now, before they get to Barcelona. They need to have some frank conversations so that they can come out as a united team and get this season finished in the best way possible. Let's see. Charles has been the #1 driver since last year, says Cosmos 2017. Probably has, hasn't he, in terms of results? Yeah, you're right. Alonso, if I remember, got something similar. Lost love for Ferrari and start criticising each other. He absolutely did. That's a point I made on the radio over the weekend. This is not the first time that this has happened. You know, people talk a lot about a toxic environment at Ferrari. I can only view it from the outside. I've never worked there, but I do know people who have worked there and they back up that theory. So I'm inclined to believe that it's a very difficult place to work, partly because of the pressure that comes from being an almost national team, but also from the inside, from the culture within the organisation. It's not... If you look at the success Mercedes have had and you look at the way their organisation works from the outside, but also from the inside, clearly, it's a completely different way of working. One allows the individuals to thrive, to feel comfortable in, you know, taking risks, and if they make a mistake, that's okay because it's something to learn from. It allows individuals to take responsibility for their area. Ferrari seems the opposite of all of that, and it has done for a long time. And yeah, you're right. You know, Kimi fell out with Ferrari at times. Fernando fell out with Ferrari, and now we're seeing Sebastian Vettel fall out with Ferrari too. So these things don't happen by accident. So I think Ferrari need to look inside themselves, but they've got an immediate problem, which is we're in the middle of a season and there's a war brewing between its main driver, or its 4-time world champion driver, and the team itself, and they should not be doing that in public. What are you saying? Ferrari are a strange team, says Phantom Tetra. Yeah, they are. The toxic environment at Ferrari is Ferrari's fault, says Jan Vides. Yeah, I mean, that is... Can't blame anybody else, can they? That's true. They've got to sort it out. They talked recently, didn't they, about rebuilding for a future, and that's part of the reasoning for taking a new driver lineup. Well, they need to rebuild right from the inside. I mean, the very fact that they're still making tragic strategic decisions on track, as well as the fact their drivers making mistakes and they're blaming each other openly, they've got to look inside, haven't they? They've got to rebuild from within, right from the very bottom, or even from the very top down, maybe. Maybe we should be looking at the top. You know, lots of people got question marks over Binotto. I kind of think there's a lot good about Binotto compared to the people that have led that team in the past. What he needs to do is get a structure beneath him that's you know, more like the structure that Toto Wolff has at Mercedes. It feels like Binotto, up until very recently, is still trying to do everything, can't release any power or any responsibility, doesn't necessarily trust those beneath him. Again, I'm speculating, but that's what it feels like. Let me see. Or on the other end, Leclerc was incredible again. How does he do it? Yes, he was. Absolutely. Leclerc, great job from Leclerc. And I say that because he's got a car that's not good. We know how bad, how disappointing, or how difficult that Ferrari is right now. It's a tricky car, massively down on power on a circuit at Silverstone. That's all about power and high speed, and so they had to hugely compromise the setup to get around there in any way competitively. And again, Charles Leclerc managed to drag a result out of that the car probably didn't deserve. So he's doing a great job, whereas that's probably what's also making Sebastian look so bad, is that one driver's doing a great job, the other's falling off the scale. Get Flavio Briatore. Eduardo Castro. Get Flav back, blimey. Yeah, he's exactly what Ferrari need right now, isn't he? Ferrari has had no strategy since 2010 when they covered Webber instead of Vettel. Says Cosmos 2017 again. Yeah, they've been disappointing in so many areas, Ferrari, haven't they? For such a long time, which is a real shame. Okay, let's have a look then, because I've got another one on Sebastian Vettel. Here, Ash says, could the Hulk see out the Ferrari season in place of Vettel? Vet can only be carrying on to maintain the Aston Martin hope, otherwise, surely he'd have sacked it off by now. Well, I'm going to say that Seb wouldn't sack it off. I don't think he's that character. I can't see Seb walking away from Ferrari, even though things are bad, things are really bad. I can't see him walking away. If Ferrari come along and say, we'd like to part ways early, and here's a bunch of cash or whatever, maybe it would go that way, but I'm not sure. And would it be Hulk? I mean, yeah, Hulk is all of a sudden the go-to supply teacher for Formula One teams, isn't he? Did a great job, by the way, Nico Hülkenberg, all weekend. Absolutely shone, loved it. Somebody said to me earlier, did they pit him at the end of that race to give to put Lance ahead of him? I mean, quite probably. But actually, let's just quickly talk about that. I'd have probably done the same. Lance is their permanent driver. He's in the championship. Hulk isn't. Hulk's going to disappear again very soon. So it was the right thing to do. I mean, whether that was the reason, he did report vibrations on the tyres, and given what we had last weekend with tyres, maybe there's some sense in that anyway. But if they were switching drivers to get Lance, it's not because Lance is the boss's son, it's because he's the permanent driver at the team, and it makes absolute sense. Anyway, could Hulk step in for Sebastian Vettel for the rest of this season? I personally think it's highly unlikely. I think Ferrari, and that's not even the answer, is it, for Ferrari? So Ferrari need to sort their problems out rather than just kind of run away from them and try and patch it up with a new driver who, you know, would not be a permanent thing. If they can't get Carlos Sainz in, which I don't think they can, does it make any sense to bring in a stand-in just for half a season? Not in my opinion, but what do you think? Dropping Seb mid-season would be a PR disaster for Ferrari. Yeah, I agree. So they need to patch it up with Seb, they need to sort it out, they need to have these conversations behind the scenes and come out united this weekend in Spain. Where will Hulk go, says JC. It's a very good question, but I tell you what, he has done himself no harm in terms of putting himself back on the map this weekend. Don't underestimate how difficult that must have been this weekend to step into a car. I know it wasn't that long since he was racing in Formula One, but to step into a new car, new team, and do as well as he did this weekend, I take my hat off to him. I thought he was great. And he is talking to other teams. He's already told us that. There are very few seats available now, and they're not that competitive, most likely. I can't see him going to Red Bull, as some people have suggested. So I don't know where he'd end up, but if he wants a seat on the grid and he's not worried about challenging for that elusive podium, maybe he could find a way back. Who knows? Haas. Andrew Storm says Haas, yeah. that is probably the best option, isn't it? It's going to be interesting actually what happens at Racing Point, you know, with Seb, with Perez. You know, whilst we're talking about Sebastian Vettel, do Racing Point want Sebastian Vettel over Sergio Perez? I know we could talk about that all night, but do you really? Yes, he's a 4-time world champion. He maybe brings some marketing, some PR clout to the Aston Martin thing, but I'm not sure how much in reality. And he doesn't look like he's offering a huge amount. Experience, yeah, but Perez has got plenty of experience. Can he handle pressure? Doesn't look like it. Is he making too many mistakes? Yes, he is. I don't understand the decision, is my personal opinion. I would keep Sergio Perez in that car. He's already got a contract. He was the guy they'd plumped on already. Keep it that way, in my opinion. But there we go. Let me know what you think of that one. AlphaTauri says pole sitter as another option for Hulkenberg. That means breaking into the Red Bull program, doesn't it? Which is why I think that's a difficult one. It goes everything against Red Bull, bringing in a sort of aging driver towards the end of his career. I just can't see it personally. It may be a short-term fix, but it's sort of a kick into the teeth to their own young driver program. I think they need to, you know, Red Bull need to start looking at themselves anyway as to why all of their second drivers are not matching up in any way to Max, and not even that, they're just struggling generally. And that's got to be partly to do with the culture and the quick turnaround of drivers, the sort of no forgiveness that they have in that Red Bull program. It's got to be hurting people like Alex Albon. It's got to have hurt Gasly. It's got to have hurt Kvyat and others as well. They've got to look at how that program's working for me before they start wondering why they're not getting the next world champion or potential world champion coming through. But there we go. That's just my opinion. Perez and Hulkenberg to Haas. Well, yeah, so that is, who says that? That is bits are a fault, I think. Bits are a fruit. Bits are fruit, I think. Bizarre fruit. Sorry, bizarre fruit. Maybe I do need glasses. Hulk and Perez to Haas. That could be a possibility, couldn't it? I think Roman Grosjean is edging very quickly towards the end of his career. I like Magnussen. I think he's a great driver. I think he brings a lot to a team. But I mean, Hulkenberg, as I say, has given himself a really good case to move in. I think Haas might be the most likely scenario for him. Bring back the Hulk. Yeah, Vettel to AlphaTauri. Wouldn't that be a turn up for the books? I mean, what will happen to Vettel? I said right at the beginning of this, I thought he was going to retire. And then the Racing Point stuff has come about. We know that Racing Point have been to the Contract Recognition Board to investigate whether there's even a possibility of terminating Perez's contract and bringing in Vettel. So we know there's, you know, they wanted Vettel. They wanted Vettel. Whether that's changed or changing, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Magnussen, a good driver, lol. Magnussen is a good driver. I stand by that. I think Magnussen is he can be fast on his day. But what I like about Magnussen is that he's one of those drivers that's aggressive. You know, he will fight and get you positions if you give him a car. He's what I'm talking about. Bottas at the beginning of the show not being aggressive enough. Magnussen, that's what I'm talking about. Magnussen's one of those. Yeah, you can say it can be a bit crazy, but that's what they said about Max Verstappen. And just look at him. We're not calling him crazy anymore. We're saying he's a brilliant driver. Other drivers are wary of him when they come up. They're not seeing it as an easy pass. They're taking the time. They're wondering or worrying. If he's in your rearview mirrors, you think twice before you make a desperate defend. He's the driver. He's a driver like that. I like him. Vettel has to retire or take a break, says Elena. I think that may be what will happen in the end. Magnussen's decent. Josh Smith. Kevin's good, not bad. Varun Sambi. Kimi, Vettel and Grosjean to leave next year. G. Thompson. Kimi, Vettel, Grosjean, yeah, that could well happen, couldn't it? That could well happen. Good point. Let me see what else. Will Racing Point leave as Lawrence Stroll hinted over the car? Adam Elliott. Will Racing Point leave as Lawrence Stroll hinted over the car? Tell you what, let's bring in a question about Racing Point. Is it this one? No. Let's have a look. Where is it? This one here. No. I've got a question on Racing Point somewhere. Not that one either. Hang on. Bear with me. What are we looking at here? I'll tell you what, should we talk tyres? We'll come back to that. Here we go, Racing Point. I'm glad I did all this preparation in advance. Gustavo Manuel says, why was the copying made by Racing Point over the line? How they copied different from what it had already been doing over the years. Great fan of your work. Thank you very much. So let's talk Racing Point, because that was a big talking point over the weekend. It's a hugely complicated case, this one. Trying to explain it in the broadcasts over the weekend is not an easy thing when you're trying to condense it down. My feeling on this, okay, is that there are two scenarios going here. There was a protest that Renault put in against Racing Point, centred specifically on brake ducts, wasn't it? They chose brake ducts because it's a part of the car that you can't photograph the insides of, so they thought if they've copied them as much as they knew they had, they must have got inside information from Mercedes. The truth is, they did get inside information. In fact, they had the brake ducts. But that was legally able to happen last year in 2019. So they had those in their hand. They then went on to use that information, that knowledge, that brake duct that they owned because they'd bought it legally last year, to design the 2020 brake ducts. And they are so similar because they based them on what they had bought last year. So the FIA ruled that they received that information, the brake ducts and the CAD files that went with them. They received all that legally, but they used it illegally in designing the 2020 brake ducts. So that's what the protest was all about. That's why they've been found guilty. I still think that's a very grey area. I still think that's something that we may well get a very different result after the appeal. And I know there's this little detail of Mercedes actually handing over brake ducts on the 6th of January, which I think should be investigated further, but I think I'm going to leave that to one side for now, because that's another issue altogether, really, that potentially implicates Mercedes. But let's talk the brake ducts. The brake ducts technically are legal, aren't they? Because they comply with the technical regs. The sporting regs have been breached because they've used that information. The design of that brake duct essentially belongs to Mercedes because they designed it last year. That's what it's about. You can argue all day long whether that's right or wrong. Personally, I think once you've got a set of brake ducts like that, you're already running the Mercedes suspension and gearbox on the back end of that car. You could go away and design your own brake duct, which Racing Point did, by the way, and have all the drawings to show it. It's going to come out almost identical because it has to fit all those suspension members, which are Mercedes, in there. It has to fit the upright, Mercedes. Of course it's going to look very similar, if not identical. So that's my take on it. I don't think Racing Point did anything wrong. That's the first issue, right? The brake duct issue. The much wider issue, and this is where the appeal comes in, and this is why it's wrong, the appeals are all there because everyone's thinking, well, actually, this is bigger than brake ducts. It's about copying designs, copying cars from one team to another. Should you be allowed to copy an entire car and run it as your own? So that's why everyone's appealing. That's the gist of all of this. Well, that's a separate issue from the specific brake duct issue, in my opinion. It's a valid issue that needs debating, and we need a ruling one way or another because we need to know which direction we can go. But that's not a Racing Point brake duct issue. So I think there's two separate issues. In the brake duct case, my feeling is Racing Point haven't done anything wrong and therefore shouldn't be penalised. It feels like the FIA have got themselves trapped in a hole with all of this, tried to come up with an argument that kind of appeases everybody, and actually what it's done is upset everybody, and that's where we're at. It's going to rumble on and on. We're going to get lawyers involved potentially now. It's going to go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then I suspect what will happen is Racing Point will be acquitted of the brake duct thing, and then we'll still have to have the debate about copying wider car designs. Anyway, as I say, we could talk about this because it's going to split opinion, isn't it, all day long. Not if you're supposed to design it yourself. Yeah, but okay, but they've bought the brake ducts legally last year. Okay, they've seen what a Mercedes brake duct looks like. They're using the same suspension, gearbox, uprights, the whole lot as Mercedes. So part of that is already determined. You have to fit around those components the same as Mercedes do. And you know what a brilliant job Mercedes have done with their brake ducts. They're not just cooling brakes, of course, anymore. They're a massive aero part, massive tyre management part, tyre temperature management part. of course you're likely to come up with a very similar design because it works, it's brilliant. So if you lined up all the front wings down the pit lane, you could say they're all, or most of them, are very similar to each other. Is that not the same? We could go on and on. Let me see. Why does everyone keep assuming that Racing Point will definitely keep Lance for 2021? Says Simeon. Well, let's get back to that, drivers, then. I think there's one very good reason everyone's assuming they'll keep Lance. I mean, it's not an absolute nailed-on certainty, is it? But he's the boss's son. He's the boss's son, and I suspect he's highly likely to be there, but we'll see. You never know. These comments are flying through. EJ would have told everybody to do one, says Paul Cooper. He would. He would. Yeah, I'd love to have seen EJ embroiled in this row. But, you know, I saw a lot of team principals. I saw Zach Brown come out over the weekend and not do himself any favours with the comments that he responded to the hearing. He got it wrong. You know, he was talking about illegal brake ducts being on the car and remaining on the car. Well, they're not illegal brake ducts, are they? They conform to all the technical regulations. And it felt like this argument that was brewing in public between team principals was unresearched. You know, Zach appeared uneducated about the technical details of the case at times. It was a mess. The whole thing was an absolute mess and will continue to be a mess for some time. We've got a question about copying cars. Do we want customer cars? Do we want teams to be able to buy designs from other competitors? That is the question we really need to get to the bottom of, because that shapes the future of Formula One. It's not really the absolute crux of this brake duct thing, because that was about a specific rule change that changed from a listed part to an unlisted part to a listed part between 19 and 20. It's a complicated mess. Perhaps should we perhaps move on? We could go on for this forever. They were illegally procured. That's the issue. Well, they weren't illegally procured. They were legally procured. They were, you know, even the ruling of the case says they were legally procured because you were able to buy those components last year. You can't. What they've said is you can't then use that design data to design your 2020 car. And they specifically pointed out that Racing Point didn't use the rear brake ducts from Mercedes last year, they only used the front. So if they didn't use them on the car last year, how could they form part of the design for the 2020 car? But my feeling is they had access to something quite legally in 2019. They've used that information that's now in here, obviously, and they've incorporated that in their own designs, and they are their own designs. They've drawn every single 800 odd drawings around those rear brake ducts. That's their own design. But of course it's centred on what they know. Just like every car in the pit lane is centred in aerodynamic terms around everything they know from looking up and down the pit lane. Adrian Newey is on the grid on Sunday looking at every other car with his little sketch pad out, drawing something. They've got their own photographers commissioned to take pictures of everything they want to see. You'd be amazed at the detail that teams get from pictures of every other car, almost whatever they want. We already know that some teams have even 3D scanned competitors' cars. So this is not a new thing. That's all underhand and sort of espionage. Racing Point did it legally. So I don't know, that's my feeling on it. There we go. Let's move on, I think, because that one, as I say, could run and run. Let's talk tyres, because that was a topic of the weekend. I'd like to see more races with less conservative tyre choices like yesterday, but do you think Pirelli aren't going to like it because blistering tyres are a bad advertisement in their opinion? Yes, that is highly likely to be the case. I think you're absolutely right. I think, look at this is the blister, this is the Mercedes car. Those are the blisters. Specific area around that band very, very quickly. A big part of that comes from the higher tyre pressures. And then look, the surface just boils and bubbles over and erupts like a volcano. And the surface area, the tread, just parts. And of course you get these huge gaping holes in the top of the tyre. Obviously in that situation you have almost no grip, and the whole situation just exacerbates itself because you've got no grip, you start to slide, you overheat the tyre more, the blistering gets worse. So yes, it made for brilliant racing because we ended up having for teams having to make loads more pit stops. That introduced different strategic elements. I think there was something like 41 pit stops in Sunday's race. Normally we have a one-stop race, which is everyone does one stint, makes a stop, and another stint to the flag. This time we had the options of 1 or 2 stints, and a couple of people did do 1 or 2 stops. I think a couple of people even did 3 stops. So we had a variation, and yes, you're right. We'd love to see that because it introduces this different element. But Pirelli, we had this before. Massively degrading tyres was bad PR for Pirelli, who are of course in the sport to sell tyres. So if you're seeing every weekend this brand Pirelli with tyres that just fall apart after a few laps, is it worth Pirelli being in Formula 1 and spending money on Formula 1 if actually the result they're getting is that the people in the street think Pirelli tyres are terrible? So yes, that is the answer. Yes, it's a real shame because I think it's a nice element to have, but it's not good for the tyre supplier. Mercedes has said tyre issues are nothing to do with DAS, says Josh Smith. Yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more. It's nothing to do with DAS. Mark, your sound goes off momentarily when you switch to a picture. Sorry about that. Not sure what I can do with that. Oh, I do know why that is. Boringly, because I'm filming this on a DSLR camera, there's a European regulation that says a DSLR can only operate for 30 minutes. If it operates for more than 30 minutes without shutting down, then it's a broadcast camera and you have to pay some huge broadcast tax on the equipment, believe it or not. So as it gets to 30 minutes or 25 minutes, I have to quickly switch the camera off and back on again so that we don't go over a 30-minute stint. Otherwise, it would all just go to black. So apologies for that. That's boring, I know, but that's why you lose the sound just for a moment. So I'll try and bear that in mind and stop talking. Let's go back to mixed tyre suppliers, says Neil Cunningham. The tyre war, and I know that there was some interesting racing during a tyre war, but the problem with it is it escalates costs enormously. If you have 2 companies developing tyres, and believe me, I was part of this at McLaren, you're bringing new tyres to every single race. You're upping your game. Hold on, is it frozen? Sorry guys. Let me just see what's going on here. Let's go. Yeah, we should be back. Okay, since we're on the subject of wear, would love to hear your thoughts on the 18-inch tyres currently being used in Formula 2. It seems there's been a steep learning curve coming from the 13-inch. Do you foresee these challenges happening when F1 transitions in 2022? Frank Valoria, thank you for that question. Yes, so the 18-inch tyres are being run in Formula 2. The teams have had quite a big challenge to get used to that and to understand it, and from an engineering point of view they're still understanding it, because it's not just about the way the tyre behaves, and this is exactly the same as when it comes to Formula 1. It's not just about how the tyre behaves, because you think about the dynamics of the tyre, totally different. I've done videos on it already. The movement in the tyre sidewall, of course, is completely different. The amount of squash in those tyres is completely different as well. It just behaves totally differently, and on top of that, the car has to take up an awful lot of that suspension movement that's currently taken up by the great big balloon tyres that we have on a Formula 1 car today. So yes, the Formula 1 engineers are going to have a massive challenge when it comes to the switch to 2022's 18-inch tyres. It's actually going to be a huge challenge when it comes to car design, because it's going to be a complete redesign of suspension, a complete redesign of aero. It's a complete redesign of aero anyway, but the aero around the tyre is going to be completely different too, because it's deformed. It deforms completely differently, and believe it or not, that has a huge impact on aero coming off the back of the tyre. So everything changes, and it's going to be a massive challenge. So, but that's what we want, isn't it? We want teams to be able to learn as they go, and there'll be opportunities for one team to do a better job than someone else, and that to change as the season goes on, as the understanding grows. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to most in 2022, is that nobody is going to hit the ground running with a perfect car in 2022. Somebody will do a better job than everyone else, but there's going to be room for improvement all the way through, much more so than we have now at the end of a period of relatively stable regulation. So it's exciting times ahead. Right, 10 minutes or so to go. What's this one here? This is, Red Bull. We touched on it earlier, didn't we, about the Red Bull driver programme. Do you think the constant speculation over the Red Bull number 2 seat ultimately hampers Red Bull and Max from pushing forward and challenging Mercedes? Yes, I do. I do think that. the speculation over the Red Bull number 2 seat is one of the reasons, surely, that the drivers in that position don't necessarily thrive. Drivers that we know are talented. It's also got to be the reason, hasn't it, that when the drivers like Kvyat, like Gasly, step back into AlphaTauri, as it is now, with less pressure on their shoulders, they start to perform much better. Surely Red Bull have got to be looking at that as a potential problem. I mean, it seems obvious to me, and I'm sure to many of you, drivers are human beings. And just like with the Vettel situation, your performance as a human being, whether you're going into the office every day, whether you're, doing whatever your job you're doing, but even more so at elite sport level, is affected by your mental state, by your confidence, by everything that's going on around you. So if you're worrying about your seat, if you're worrying about the pressure, if people are talking negatively about you, if you've got a whole lineup of drivers just there waiting to pounce on your seat if you make a mistake, you're not in a position to thrive and be the best you can be. And that is ultimately an inherent problem with that Red Bull situation for me. What do you think? I think Red Bull likes the hype around Verstappen. Red Bull likes the hype around Verstappen. Yeah, of course. Verstappen deserves the hype he gets. He's an unbelievably good driver. They have struck gold with Max Verstappen. He's unique. But, they have got other great drivers. Gasly is a great driver. He's showing it right now. Alex Albon, we know, is a great driver because of what he's done in the past. Danny Kvyat has even been a decent driver. But, this programme that churns them through so quickly, and they've always got the threat, literally every weekend they've got the threat of being dumped out of that main seat, has to hurt. Let's see. Albon had a good Sunday. Yeah, he did. Albon did have a good Sunday, but the problem is he doesn't have a good Saturday, and so he's always fighting from a position way lower than where he needs to be. And actually, Albon and Leclerc both moved up the order by, I think, something like 4 or 5 positions each to a much better finishing position. So they had good races. And Albon was blisteringly fast around the outside of Copse, wasn't he, on a number of occasions. Great to watch. He just needs to start the race in a much better position. The Red Bull Academy is a failure. Yeah, is it a failure? Come on, it's produced Sebastian Vettel, it's produced Max Verstappen, it's produced Daniel Ricciardo. I don't think you can say it's a failure, but right now it's failing. Right now it doesn't have a natural successor, standout natural successor to... It doesn't have the next Sebastian Vettel or Max Verstappen or Daniel Ricciardo, does it? Alex Albon, great driver. Gasly, great driver, but do we think they're going to be world champions? Perhaps they could be. Perhaps I'm being too harsh on them, but they don't have a standout driver, in my opinion, that you'd pick out from everybody on the grid and go, that guy, keep an eye on him. He's going to be a multiple world champion. So from that point of view, the conveyor belt has got a delay, hasn't it, before they find the next big guy, I guess. Let me see. Hold on. Yeah, let me see. All right, no more questions I've got in my bank. But yeah, let me see what you're saying about Red Bull, because we've got a couple of minutes left. Do you think Red Bull might go for Hulk or for Albon's seat? It's been talked about a lot, hasn't it? But I just think, whilst the Red Bull programme maybe not be delivering at the moment, they've invested a huge amount of money in the kids that are coming through there. Both the guys in the AlphaTauri, but also way beyond that in the junior categories too. If they abandon that and bring in a driver at the end of his career, what does that say for the programme? Does that not give it a massive kick in the teeth? I think I touched on it earlier. They need a Webber. Not bad for number 2. Corolla says that one. Let me see. There's a retirement home for ex-Red Bull drivers. Formula E. Ooh. Yeah, well, one of those has done a fantastic job this weekend. Big shout out to Antonio Felix da Costa, becoming world champion. First Formula E world champion, as they have now got that denotation of being a world championship. So well done to him. He's actually done a brilliant job, and he's a great driver. He's one that Red Bull let slip through the net, in my opinion, because I think he was really good. He was good enough to make it at the very top. But there we go. That's one for another day. What about the Formula E new champ coming back to Red Bull? Could he go back? I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed, but he is a cracking driver, Felix da Costa. Red Bull needs to learn that Max can't drive both cars. They need to develop new drivers. Varun Sambi, yep, totally agree with you. Could we see the return of Michelin tyres? I don't think so. I can't see that personally myself. Hulk would be great besides Max, says Juan Taplin. I mean, Hulk would be good, wouldn't he? He'd be great. He'd be great lined up in that car. I just can't see from a political point of view that that's a good move for Red Bull. Everybody's talking about Hulk right now, aren't they? Do you expect McLaren to be closer to the front next week? Stephen Parsons. McLaren were slightly disappointing, weren't they, over the course of this weekend? I think, in fact, very disappointing. Disappointing in the car, in the strategy, in the pit stops. Unfortunately, it was a bit of an off weekend for the boys and girls there. So yes, I would expect them to improve in all of those areas. But look, Barcelona, let's talk about that before we finish. Let's wrap up on that one. Barcelona is another circuit that is massively demanding on tyres, has some really high speed and long duration corners. It's going to be bloody hot. So those elements could be very similar to Silverstone. Harder tyres this weekend, but let's face it, at Silverstone in race 1 we had harder tyres and we had the problems, we had the failures. The cars are much, much quicker than we've seen in the past, and that's really where the problem is. So there is a possibility Pirelli could still instigate higher tyre pressures for this weekend. So I'm going to say this weekend that we could still see Max Verstappen being much closer to Mercedes, unless Mercedes can suddenly find some kind of silver bullet to their problem. But we're going to have some similar conditions we had this weekend that cost Mercedes and swung it all towards Verstappen. In terms of McLaren, I think they can certainly tidy up some of the operational errors, but in terms of the pace of the car, I think we're going to have to wait maybe another race. Barcelona is going to be similar enough that some of the characteristics that hampered teams at Silverstone may well present themselves just a week later in Spain. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, it is basically 10 o'clock, guys. I appreciate you all joining tonight. Really, really good. Loads to talk about. As I said, it was a great weekend. Thank you for all of your questions, all of your comments. It doesn't go amiss, I promise you. I even go back and read as many as I can afterwards because I appreciate you taking the time to do it. So thank you. I will be back tomorrow with something. I've got a video, a day in the life of a Formula One commentator. Even though I was only commentator for a day, I've done a little video about it behind the scenes, just showing you what it was like. So that will probably come up tomorrow. And there'll be loads more this week, of course. And then we get straight into another Grand Prix. Spain at the weekend. I'll be back with a preview to that on Wednesday or Thursday. So have a great week, folks. Any questions, continue to fire them in. I'll try and do my best to answer them. But I will see you all very, very soon. Have a great one. Thanks, folks. Ta-ra.